Most people build container gardens the same way every spring. They go to the garden center, they fill a cart with annuals, they spend more than they planned. They plant everything. It looks beautiful for a season, and then October arrives and all of it is finished. Dead or dying, heading for the compost pile or the trash. And the following April, the whole cycle starts over. Same expense, same effort, same result. There is a better way to build a container garden, not instead of annuals. Annuals have genuine value, and I still use them, but alongside them, or in place of them, using perennials that come back every year in the same container, that grow larger and more generous with every passing season, and that eliminate a significant portion of the replanting expense and labor that makes container gardening feel like a recurring cost rather than a permanent investment. I have been experimenting with perennials in containers for years. Some of that experimentation came from necessity. Plants that were struggling in the ground that I moved to containers and watched improve dramatically. Some came from deliberate design choices, and some came from happy accidents that produced combinations I would never have planned, but that I have been growing and refining ever since. 20 perennials today, categorized into sun-loving combinations and shade combinations, so you can hear which plants pair beautifully together and start building those combinations in your own containers this season. I will give you specific variety recommendations, companion planting ideas, and the succession blooming strategy that keeps a perennial container looking interesting and alive from spring through fall, rather than peaking once and then declining. One important note before we begin. When you choose perennials for containers, select plants that are at least 2 hardiness zones hardier than your own growing zone. Container plants are not insulated by the earth the way in-ground plants are. Their roots are exposed to ambient temperatures through the container walls. A plant that is reliably perennial in your zone when grown in the ground may not survive a container winter in that same zone. Choose hardier than you think you need, and your containers will come back. Choose right at the edge, and you will lose plants to winters that in-ground specimens in your same garden would have handled without difficulty. Drop your growing zone in the comments right now, and tell me what container combinations you have already tried. I want to know what is working in your specific climate. Number 1 is Coreopsis. Coreopsis is the sun-loving container perennial that earns its space from mid-spring through fall without interruption, producing a continuous succession of daisy-like flowers in golden yellow, peachy coral, warm red, and soft pink, depending on the variety you choose. Moonbeam is the classic, a pale, soft yellow that pairs with almost everything. But the recent breeding expansions in this genus have produced varieties across a color range that makes it one of the most versatile perennials available for the sunny container. The key quality that makes Coreopsis ideal for container use is that it does not produce one flush and then require a cutback before returning. It blooms continuously, keeping the container active and visually interesting through the entire growing season, without the gaps that single flush perennials create. Low water needs, full sun, and a container with excellent drainage are the requirements. It does not want wet feet, and a container that drains freely suits it perfectly. Companion plants for a sun-loving Coreopsis container: salvia for spring vertical interest, sedum for late-season color that carries the container through fall when the Coreopsis begins to slow. The principle of succession blooming is the foundation of a perennial container that looks intentional all season long. Coreopsis carries the container from mid-spring. Salvia overlaps with it and extends through summer. Sedum takes the baton in late summer and carries through fall. One container, 3 perennials, continuous interest from April through October. Number 2 is Salvia nemorosa. Salvia is the container perennial that pairs beautifully with almost everything in this list. Deer and rabbit resistant without exception, drought tolerant in a genuine rather than a qualified sense, and producing those upright purple-blue flower spikes in a vertical habit that contrasts perfectly with mounding and trailing companions. The spiky growth habit is the design detail that makes salvia so valuable in a mixed container. Most perennials mound. They spread outward and fill horizontal space. Salvia goes up, providing the vertical element that gives a container visual structure and keeps it from reading as a flat, undifferentiated mass at viewing distance. Deadhead through the season as flower spikes finish, and it continues pushing new bloom without the long recovery period that some perennials require between flushes. Pair salvia with coneflower for a container that transitions beautifully from late spring through midsummer, as the salvia carries the early display and the coneflower takes over as summer heat arrives. Add sedum for the fall contribution, and you have a 3-season container from 3 perennials that all return in the same pot the following spring. That combination, salvia, coneflower, sedum, is one of the most reliable and visually complete sun-loving perennial container combinations available for most American growing zones. Number 3 is daylily, specifically shorter varieties. The Stella de Oro, golden yellow, prolific, blooming over an extraordinarily long season relative to most daylilies, is the starting point for container work because its compact stature fits a pot without overrunning it, and its continuous bloom cycle keeps the container producing across a longer window than most daylilies manage. The succession blooming strategy with daylilies and containers is one of the most elegant available to any container gardener. Daylilies bloom at different times depending on variety. Early season, midsummer, and late season blooming types all exist within the compact stature range suitable for containers. Plant 3 different varieties chosen for sequential bloom timing in one large container, and you have daylilies in flower from early summer through September, without repetition or gap. Each variety carries the container while the next one builds toward its own peak. Pair daylilies with a short ornamental grass. Little bunny fountain grass reaches 10 to 12 inches tall and 14 to 18 inches wide, a proportion that works perfectly in a container. And as the daylily foliage begins to fade through late summer, the grass fills in, providing textural interest that keeps the container looking considered rather than tired. Number 4 is sedum. Sedum earns its place in the container garden across multiple seasons and in multiple roles simultaneously. As a foliage plant through spring and early summer, the thick, succulent leaves of varieties like Autumn Joy provide structural interest and textural contrast. As a blooming plant in late summer and fall, the flower clusters emerge and color up progressively through the season, beginning pink-tinted, deepening through rose, and remaining on the plant as dried structure through winter, in a form that pollinators visit through the active season and birds pick through in the cold months. Hens and chicks bring a completely different scale and texture to the sedum category, rosette forming, spreading gradually across the surface of a container, filling bare soil between taller companions in a way that reads as intentional ground coverage within the pot. Sedum angelina trails over container edges in a chartreuse yellow that functions as the spiller component in sun-loving combinations, eliminating the need to purchase an annual trailer while providing the same cascading effect. All sedums want full sun and excellent drainage. A container that dries out between waterings suits them far better than one kept consistently moist. They are among the most drought-tolerant perennials on this entire list, and will perform without complaint in conditions that stress most other container plants. Number 5 is Nepeta, catmint. Catmint brings a billowing, flowing quality to the container that no other perennial on this list replicates. The soft mounds of silver-green aromatic foliage spill naturally over container edges, providing the trailing element that most container designs require without the annual purchase that traditional spillers demand. Above that foliage, lavender-blue flower spikes appear from late spring through fall in continuous waves. Deadhead the spent flush, and a fresh wave of color returns within weeks. The fragrance is a genuine and underappreciated quality in a container positioned on a porch or patio where people sit in the evening. Catmint releases its minty aromatic quality when brushed. Incidental contact as someone passes the container or sits beside it delivers the fragrance that makes this plant a sensory as well as a visual contributor to the container environment. Pair with Stella de Oro daylily for a golden yellow and lavender blue combination that is classically beautiful without being predictable. Add a compact shrub rose and the container becomes one of the most complete and genuinely lovely combinations available from perennial plants alone. Rose, catmint, and daylily providing structure, fragrance, and long-season bloom from a single planting that returns every year. Number 6 is Echinacea, coneflower. Select varieties that stay in the 18 to 24-inch height range for container work. The straight native Echinacea purpurea can reach 4 feet and becomes difficult to manage in a container at that scale. The compact named varieties, Magnus, Kim's Knee High, and the extensive range of hybrid selections now available, provide that same ornamental performance at a size that suits a pot. Full sun, well-draining potting medium, and patience through the first season while the root system establishes in the container. By the second year, the flowering is significantly more generous than the first. By the third year, an established coneflower in a large container is producing a display that justifies every decision that went into planting it. The seed heads that develop as individual flowers fade are not a sign of declining interest. They are one of the container's most valuable ongoing features. Goldfinches work through those seed heads from late summer onward, bringing wildlife activity directly to a patio or porch container in a way that few other perennial plantings manage. Number 7 is lavender. Lavender in a container is one of the most satisfying combinations of beauty, fragrance, and practical garden performance available from a single plant. It comes from the Mediterranean and wants exactly what a well-draining container in full sun provides. Lean, fast-draining soil that never stays wet, maximum sun exposure, and the kind of occasional neglect that keeps it from being overwatered. A container actually suits lavender better than garden soil in many American growing regions, precisely because drainage control is total. You choose the medium, you manage the moisture, and you eliminate the standing water conditions that kill lavender in garden beds with heavier soils. The fragrance released on a warm evening from a lavender container positioned near outdoor seating is one of the genuine luxuries of a well-planted patio. Number 8 is Allium millennium. The clumping perennial alliums, particularly millennium, which produces those perfect sphere-shaped purple blooms on upright stems in midsummer, bring an architectural quality to the container that most other perennials at this scale cannot provide. The round bloom form contrasts beautifully with the softer mounding and trailing habits of companion plants, and the timing of the bloom, midsummer, after spring interest has peaked, fills exactly the gap that many perennial containers struggle with. Pair Allium Millennium with a soft yellow yarrow for a purple and yellow combination that reads from distance with the clarity of a considered design. Add Coral Jade Sedum for fall interest as the alliums finish. Or pair with a white-flowering Calamintha, a white-bloomed relative of catmint that flowers later in the season, for a refined, elegant container combination that extends the blooming interest well into fall, from a planting that returns every year without replacement. Number 9 is Scabiosa Butterfly Blue. If you have not grown Scabiosa Butterfly Blue before, this is the recommendation from this list that I want you to act on immediately. Because this plant is one of the most prolific and consistent bloomers available for the container garden, and it is genuinely underused relative to what it delivers. It blooms from spring through fall without significant interruption, not with the occasional secondary flush that requires management and deadheading to encourage, but with a sustained, self-renewing display of lavender blue pincushion flowers that simply keeps producing across the entire growing season. Pollinators cover it from the moment the first flowers open. The compact stature, 12 to 15 inches, fits containers at every scale, from a small porch pot to a large statement container. Grow it as a standalone specimen for simplicity. Combine it with companion perennials for a more complex display. Either way, once Scabiosa Butterfly Blue is established in a container, it becomes one of the most reliable flowering performers in the entire garden. Number 10 is Rosa, Compact Shrub Rose. Roses in containers surprised me the first time I tried them, or rather, the first time a rose insisted on the trial by declining in the garden to the point where I moved it to a pot out of desperation rather than design. It thrived. The container environment, with its controlled drainage and the ability to position the plant for optimal sun exposure, suits compact shrub roses in ways that difficult garden soil conditions often prevent. Choose varieties that stay 2 to 3 feet tall and wide as a natural, mature size. Not climbing roses, not large, shrubby roses that will overwhelm the container within a season, but compact, repeat-blooming shrub roses that bring classic flower form and fragrance to a pot that you can move, reposition, and manage for drainage in ways that in-ground roses do not allow. Underplant with nepeta spilling over the container edge, or scatter alyssum seeds in the surrounding soil for seasonal fragrance and color at the base of the rose cans. The combination of a compact rose with catmint as a companion is one of the most classically beautiful and genuinely fragrant container plantings available from perennial plants alone. That is 10. 10 sun-loving perennial container plants, some with specific companion combinations that turn a single plant into a 3-season display, and every one of them returning to the same container next spring without being replaced. Part 2 covers the remaining 10, all of them shade-loving or shade-tolerant, and includes the specific foliage combinations that make shade containers one of the most visually sophisticated and lowest-maintenance container gardens you can build. Subscribe now so you do not miss it. 10 sun-loving perennials down. 10 shade perennials to go. And the shade category is where container gardening gets genuinely interesting for a large portion of American gardeners who have north-facing porches, covered patios, tree-canopied yards, or any outdoor space where direct sun is limited, and the standard advice, plant more annuals, produces disappointing results season after season. Shade containers rely more heavily on foliage than flower. That is not a limitation. That is a design opportunity. Foliage combinations produce containers that look considered and intentional from the moment the plants emerge in spring through the last days of the growing season, without the peaks and valleys that flower-dependent containers go through as individual plants cycle in and out of bloom. The shade perennials on this list give you color, texture, and structure from foliage alone, with flowering bonuses from several of them that make the display richer without depending on bloom for the container's primary visual contribution. Number 11 is hosta. Hosta is the foundation plant of the shade container garden, in the same way that salvia is the foundation plant of the sunny border. It anchors everything around it. It comes in foliage colors ranging from deep blue-green through chartreuse, gold, white variegated, and combinations of all of them. It pairs with virtually every other shade-loving plant on this list, and it performs in the container environment with a consistency and a generosity that its reputation in the ground sometimes fails to reflect, particularly for gardeners dealing with deer pressure, which eliminates hostas from open garden beds, while containers on a covered porch or elevated deck remain untouched. Pair a large blue-green hosta with Japanese painted fern and hakone grass. The Japanese forest grass in its all-gold variety, for a three-plant shade combination that covers every design element simultaneously. The hosta provides bold foliage and scale. The fern provides intricate texture and the silver-green patterning of its fronds. The hakone grass provides movement and that warm gold color that illuminates shaded spaces in a way that few other plants manage. This combination has been growing in my own containers for multiple seasons, and it remains one of the most effortlessly beautiful plantings I have ever put together. Number 12 is heuchera, coral bells. Heuchera performs better in containers than it does in the ground for many gardeners, myself included. In the ground, the cycle is familiar and frustrating. Excellent first season, reduced the second, essentially gone by the third winter. In containers with controlled drainage and the ability to site them precisely for the light conditions they prefer, heuchera thrives with a consistency that the garden bed never produced. The foliage range is extraordinary and has expanded dramatically through recent breeding. Deep purple approaching black, bright caramel and amber, lime green and chartreuse, warm orange, silver overlaid green. Every color in the heuchera palette works as a foliage contrast plant in combination with hostas, ferns, and grasses. And the newer varieties with increased sun tolerance have expanded the range of positions where they perform well beyond the traditional shade-only placement. Number 13 is astilbe, the flowering perennial that genuinely prefers shade and that provides something most shade container perennials cannot: tall, feathery, plume-like flower spikes in white, pink, rose, red, and peach that rise above the foliage in midsummer and provide the vertical color interest that shade containers often lack. The finely divided fern-like foliage is attractive and textural throughout the entire season before and after bloom. Astilbe wants moist but well-draining soil and benefits from regular feeding. A container environment where both of those variables are completely within your control suits it well. Pair with a bold-leaved hosta and a trailing creeping jenny for a shade combination that covers bold form, feathery texture, and cascading movement simultaneously. Number 14 is Japanese painted fern. Ferns in containers provide the kind of intricate layered texture that no broadleaf plant replicates. And Japanese painted fern specifically brings something beyond basic green frond texture. Silver and burgundy patterning across the fronds that makes it one of the most ornamentally sophisticated foliage plants available for shade containers at any price point. It has been growing in my own shade containers for years, paired with dark-leaved heuchera and hakone grass, returning every season more established and more beautifully structured than the last. It requires no deadheading, no bloom management, and no maintenance beyond the spring removal of the previous year's fronds before new growth emerges. Number 15 is hakone grass, Japanese forest grass, the grass that illuminates shade. Hakonecloa macra, in its all-gold variety, produces cascading flowing foliage in a warm chartreuse gold color that seems to generate its own light in dim conditions, a quality that no other shade plant at this scale matches. It moves in the slightest breeze, bringing that gentle animation to a container planting that static foliage cannot provide. It pairs with virtually every shade perennial on this list, and consistently functions as the element that makes a foliage combination feel complete rather than assembled. Hardy in zones 5 through 9 in containers with appropriate zone adjustment as discussed. Number 16 is lamium, dead nettle. Lamium is the shade container's answer to the trailing annual spiller, a spreading, low-growing perennial that moves across the soil surface and over container edges with a natural ease that makes it one of the most useful structural plants in a shade combination. The foliage comes in silver variegated, gold variegated, and combinations of both. And at points through the season, small pink, purple, or white flowers appear above the foliage as a seasonal bonus that requires no management to produce. Pair lamium at the base of a taller hosta, or a structural fern, and it performs the same function as an annual ground cover within the container, while returning every year without repurchasing. That single quality, the elimination of the annual spiller purchase from a container that already contains the perennial structure you want to keep, is where the long-term economics of perennial container gardening become clearly apparent. Number 17 is creeping jenny. One important note: creeping jenny has been classified as invasive in certain states and is unavailable at nurseries in some regions as a result. Check your local regulations before purchasing. For container use specifically, where the plant is contained within a pot and not allowed access to open ground, the invasive concern is manageable, and the ornamental value is genuine. That chartreuse lime cascading foliage, spilling over a dark container edge, is one of the most visually striking combinations in container design. It pairs with dark-leaved heuchera for a color contrast that reads from across a garden. It brightens shade combinations that risk reading as too dark or too uniform. And once established in a container, it divides freely, providing new plants for other containers at no additional cost for as long as you want to grow it. Number 18 is boxwood. Structure and permanence are what boxwood brings to the container garden. And for gardeners in cold climate regions where winter interest matters, where the garden needs something to look at through the months when everything else is dormant, an evergreen container plant is not a luxury. It is a design necessity. A boxwood trained into a topiary form in a container creates a year-round structural anchor for a patio or porch that no flowering perennial can provide. Underplant with creeping jenny for a simple, clean combination that requires nothing from you beyond the annual light shaping that maintains the topiary form. The boxwood provides the evergreen permanence. The jenny provides the seasonal chartreuse contrast. Together, they produce a container that looks intentional in July and equally intentional in January. Number 19 is Japanese maple. A Japanese maple in a container is one of the most dramatic and most rewarding long-term container investments you can make. The foliage, whether green, red, or the purple-tinged varieties, provide season-long color and delicate texture that no other tree at this scale matches. The autumn color transition adds a second wave of visual intensity as the growing season closes. And the bare structure of the branches through winter has its own quiet architectural beauty in a container positioned where it can be seen from indoors. Containers also allow you to test light positions before committing to a permanent in-ground placement. Japanese maples want part shade, and finding the right exposure for a specific variety is easier when the plant is movable. There is a Facebook group dedicated to Japanese maple container gardening with tens of thousands of members, a community resource worth finding if this plant becomes a serious interest. Number 20 is clumping bamboo. Clumping bamboo, specifically the clumping variety, never the running variety which spreads invasively through underground rhizomes, provides a textural and structural quality in a container that nothing else on this list replicates. The upright calms, the fine leaf texture, the movement in the slightest breeze, and the semi-evergreen quality that keeps foliage on the plant through mild winters make it one of the most distinctive container specimens available. In a Japanese-inspired garden space, a zen corner, or any outdoor area where you want a backdrop of living green that provides both privacy screening and ornamental texture, clumping bamboo in a long container planter delivers a result that arrives immediately and improves every year as the clump fills the container more completely. Quick care notes that apply across all 20. Containers need drainage holes and, ideally, plant feet to elevate the base and facilitate drainage. Use potting soil specifically formulated for containers, not garden soil, which compacts in a container and defeats drainage. Choose containers rated for frost resistance if you are in a cold climate, and leaving pots outdoors through winter. The two-zone hardiness rule applies universally. Choose plants rated 2 zones hardier than your growing zone for reliable container overwintering. Water when the soil feels dry. Deadhead as blooms finish. Cut back in spring as new growth emerges. That is the complete care schedule for every perennial on this list. One purchase, years of returns. Which of these 20 are you adding to your containers this season? Tell me in the comments right now.